Hey, thank you for clicking in. Today I'm joined by Dr. Doug Cardell, economist and author of the bestseller Why Socialism Struggles, and one of the clearest voices out there in evidence based economics. Dr. Cardell holds a PhD in economic policy. His background spans Capitol Hill, corporate leadership, education, and system dynamics modeling. In this episode, we're touching the lightning rod of our time: socialism versus capitalism, the proper role of government in a free society, historical lessons, taxation, social security, and practical reforms that could lead towards greater prosperity and individual freedom. Dr. Cardell brings an evidence based historical perspective on these topics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did with Dr. Doug Cardell. Thank you. Well, hi, Doug. Thanks for joining us. We are going to jump into quite a bit of economics, a lot of it based off of your recent book. But thanks again for making the time.
Oh, you bet.
Great. So we should start with the title of your book. You've got it back there. I got myself a copy: Why Socialism Struggles. And I like the way you open your book because you chat about exactly what socialism is. I think there's a lot of confusion on what that term means. It's quite a loaded term, in my opinion, since it's also, I think, especially in recent years, kind of been stretched into exactly what the concept is. And I'll start with a little bit of the steel man here, which is that the concept of socialism in recent years has been more about government assistance to folks who need it for a number of different reasons that it could be. But you jump right in into your book and say, well, let's make some distinctions between socialism, democratic socialism, and social government programs that are for the people. So what is that definition in the spectrum of socialism to, say, completely free market capitalism?
Well, true socialism is a form, one of several forms, of a centrally planned economy. And in true socialism, what you're looking at is the government owning the means of production, that is, all the companies, and
Hmm.
all property.
Hmm.
And there are several variations of centrally planned economies. Communism. Communism is basically a myth. Marx's vision there was that socialism would become so successful that the government would wither away.
Hmm.
And clearly that's never happened. And I think most reasonable people would agree it's a pipe dream, that if people get in power, they're not going to go away and leave the system to run itself. Um, Fascism is another system very close to fascism or communism or socialism, in that it controls the means of production and controls all property rather than outright owning it. And so essentially the three are basically the same thing. It doesn't really matter if the government is owning the means of production or controlling the means of production. The effect on the economy is the same. That is, the government is in charge of the economy.
So I
Um,
think one. Go ahead, Doug.
Well, I was going to move to democratic, what they call democratic socialism, which is also a myth. Socialism and democracy are incompatible.
Hmm.
Most people, when they talk about democratic socialism, they're referring to one of two things. They're either referring to the Nordic countries, which would be the first people to tell you. In fact, there's a speech online, anybody can look it up, by the prime minister of one of the Nordic countries. I don't remember which one,
Hmm.
clearly spending 15 minutes explaining that they are not in any way socialist, that they call themselves social democracies. And I think that's where the confusion comes from. They're absolutely capitalist countries with just a slightly larger safety net than the US has. And by many measures, they actually have a freer economy, a freer capitalism than the US does. The other thing that people refer to, and they refer to as democratic socialism, is the position of the Democratic Socialists of America.
Hmm.
And they see what they call democratic socialism as a waypoint to true capitalism. That's what they say on their website, in any case, that they're really shooting for complete capitalism, and they see this as a way to get there.
Hmm.
Um, So where do we go from here?
So, well, you mentioned, I mean, later on in your book, you go into crony capitalism because a lot of people feel disaffected by what they call today's version of capitalism, and I think it's, you know, you kind of nailed it on the head here, where you said a lot of the issues that we see where people are upset over today's version of capitalism is actually when the introduction of government intervenes, and one of the most frustrating things is where we see a moat built around an industry and there are, I forgot exactly what the phrase is, but kind of like a cartel in the economic term, where you have a handful of industries that are leaders, and they create a moat around where other people cannot enter. A simple example would be like airlines. If you want to introduce a new airline, and you know you want to get involved in it, there's a lot of upfront regulation and fees that you need to get
Sure.
yourself involved with. And so, I mean, this is the sneaky thing is some of those are actually quite valuable. You know, like you want high degrees of safety regulation. On the other hand, what you'll see is on the flip side where industry leaders will lobby for um, they will lobby for rules and regulation that are just insurmountable or that cost a large amount of money upfront that don't actually provide any value. But they'll hide it under terms like safety regulation. And that's
Absolutely.
really sneaky because some of it is valuable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, I think a lot of the problem is that too many people confuse capitalism and with the mistakes of government.
Mhm.
But I can give you a really good example. It may take a minute or two, but
We have time.
let's let's look at the last 100 years and what happened with the environment over the starting around 1900 in that area. Uh, we decided as a country, as a government, that the environment needed us to manipulate it. So we did things like help the deer population by killing off the wolves, putting a
Mm,
bounty on wolves. And what we found out was the deer population exploded and crashed and ended up far worse off. And we had to end up reintroducing wolves in order to solve the problem. We made mistake after mistake after mistake trying to fix the environment. Now, finally, in very recent times, in the last 20 years, we finally come to adopt policies that say, you know what, we better not mess with the environment. What we better do is protect it, keep other people from messing with it.
mm,
And so, yes, should we stop polluters? Absolutely. Should we stop people from doing anything that harms the environment? Absolutely. That's a key role of government.
mhm,
Well, the environment is just like the economy.
mhm,
They are both complex systems that are too big to manage. That's the whole problem with centrally planned economies is that there just isn't enough we don't have they don't have the knowledge to do that. And so we have to adopt the same humility that we did with the environment and say
mhm,
to ourselves, self, this is too big for us. We can't do this. It's impossible because the system is a complex, spontaneously ordered, adaptive system that's run by feedback loops. And
yeah.
you make a tiny change. A guy named Lorenz proved in 72 that the weather was a complex adaptive system like that, and that a tiny change in anything could screw the whole thing up. And that was called the butterfly effect. I'm sure our listeners are familiar with the term. And uh, yeah, his famous quote was, "Can a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil precipitate a tornado in Texas?" And yeah, he was able to prove that it could.
Yeah, we spoke a little bit before about this, and I mean the weather is a very complex system, and I think most people would, I hope, can see that that's true without arguing too much about it. But even if there are, we have thousands of years of mathematical predictions that have failed because it's so hard to predict the weather. I mean, the best thing we can do is understand these the cyclic nature of seasons and make long term predictions. but day to day variance is way too high. We did discuss a much simpler model, which is it's one of the easiest problems out there where you start hitting these chaotic systems, and it's what they call the double pendulum, right? I thought this was a really good example
Hmm.
where you have, say, like a pencil. This could be a pendulum if there's a joint at the top. If we have two pencils, or let's say a pencil and a chapstick,
Hmm.
this is now a double pendulum. 2 degrees of freedom, two angles describe the entirety of the system. Well, yeah, really 2 dimensions and a couple of lengths, but that's the full system. It's very simple. This is a chaotic system, and what it means, you describe this in your book, but this is well known in mathematics for a very long time. This has been known, where if you change an initial condition, you could get a wildly different oscillation.
Exactly
Now,
right.
there's this whole idea of like small oscillation and linearization and all that, which is really cool. So you get nice predictable outcomes. But it's a chaotic system where we cannot fully describe it if you change the initial conditions even a little bit. That's it's chaotic. And that's simple. Now we're trying to introduce an economy which has human emotion and psychology involved with it, along with the science and technology that we cannot predict, or even, going backwards is difficult to really make sense out of. We in your
Yeah.
book you discuss this as well, where we go through a couple of industrial revolutions, and that's only a part of the story, like, the human history and in innovation and science has just massively changed the future at any one of those points.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, one of the examples that you described. I can't remember exactly how you described it, but it did have me thinking about something, which is a centrally planned economy is gonna have some set of decision makers, and who those decision makers are is gonna be a very small subset of the entire population. So any centrally planned economy is actually, you're automatically not going to get a populace of equality.
Right.
It's You need someone to centrally plan it. And who those central planners are and how they can operate in your best interest is impossible. I was thinking about this example where um you talk about like empathizing with a friend or family member, and you think about all their wants and desires, and it's like, if I had to make all the decisions for my parents or for my siblings or for my close friends, I would not be able to maximize their happiness,
That's right.
and that's me caring about them. Now imagine we have a layer of bureaucracy between a decision maker and to whom those decisions befall. You're not going to get the best outcomes.
No, that's a key part of what socialist leaning people don't understand is that the whole concept of value and value, they tend to think of it in very absolute terms that this has value, and a certain value. But the reality is, nothing has value except the value that we as individuals attribute to it. And so the chances that you and I would value the same thing identically is virtually impossible. I, Almost anything we would want to pick, we probably wouldn't value it identically. Now, some
Hmm.
people may value things more similarly to the way I do than others. Sure. And maybe with close friends and family, as you mentioned. And so I might be able to make a reasonable guess about some of the things that my kids or my grandkids might benefit from, but it's only going to be a reasonable guess. And I'm going to be wrong a lot of the time because
Hmm.
we don't share exactly the same values. And And that's part of the problem with a lot of what socialists want to do with the economy here in the US. So, for example, something like a minimum wage. What that
Hmm.
is a statement saying this amount of labor is worth this much.
Hmm.
And nobody can make any statement like that about value because there's no way to know that answer. We all value things differently. I remember I served in the military, and a while back somebody said, "Well, what would what was going through your head when you decided that it was a smart idea to put your life on the line like that.
mm,
I said, well, those are the things that I value. I, I, I think I believe in duty, honor, country, and
mhm,
uh, yeah, I'm willing to die for them if I have to. And
mhm.
the person I was talking to was just incredulous. They couldn't even imagine the possibility that somebody could think that way. And that's the nature of value. We're all different.
Did you come from a military family?
Yeah, actually, my mom and dad both served in World War II. Um, I actually, my fourth great grandfather was killed in the Revolution.
Wow, wow. That's a very long history to trace back to the very beginnings of this. You said the Revolutionary War against England. We're talking before the Declaration of Independence was even before the first draft was written.
Well, actually,
Well, sorry, no, that was the Constitution. Sorry, yeah.
he was killed in
Well,
'78.
yeah. Well, the skirmishes began before, but yeah, the actual war came a little bit later. Um, there's a few different directions to go, but while we're here in the early Americas, you pointed out that, and I didn't know this, is that when the U.S. was first populated by the Mayflower, they actually approached this in a collectivist way. They were going with a centrally planned economy, and this was a tiny economy, especially compared to
Hmm.
today. It was less than a
Yeah.
village, and they decided, hey, you know what? We'll all put in equal input, and we'll get equal output. Of course, equal input is not carryover. I mean, this is just what you're talking about, the labor theory of value, which is your time and effort is not what's value. It's your output and productivity and how society values it. But this fell
Mhm.
apart, and you spoke a little bit about this. Can you share some of that history?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, it wasn't just the Mayflower. The same thing happened in the Jamestown colony.
Hmm.
Uh, both colonies were set up as collectivist enterprises. And for those who don't know, collectivism is a very informal form of socialism, I guess is
Hmm.
the way you would say it. Uh, it's a planned economy, and it's usually centrally planned. Although there have been examples of trying to do it with group planning, but uh, that can only even begin to work at a very small level, so it's not worth really thinking about. Um, and what happened was both colonies very quickly approached the starvation level. Um, they were eating shoes, digging up corpses.
Mm,
Um, it got really bad really fast, and in both cases, the governors of those colonies ultimately divided up the resources again and said, "Here, you take your plot of land, you take your plot of land, and let's just go for it." And both colonies were saved based on the governors doing that. They returned it to capitalism because the people that are socialist leaning tend to not see that in the real world, capitalism, or I'm sorry, uh, com- how can I put it? Compassion or um, cooperation and competition both have to coexist.
yeah.
And the people on the left only see the compassion and the cooperation and deny the competition.
Mm,
And that doesn't work in any form of life.
mhm,
And that's the part that people don't understand is that even within your body, cells cooperate and they compete. They're all competing for life.
mhm,
And your cells are self-interested. So there's a cell in your kidney
mm,
somewhere doing its little kidney job, and it cooperates with the other cells in the kidney, but it's also at the same time competing with them.
yeah.
But the key is that cell in your kidney doesn't even know you exist. your body is your kidney is merely the environment in which it functions. We like to think that our brains are controlling our bodies, but they aren't. I mean, half the cells in your body aren't even human. They're viruses and bacteria and all
Mm.
kinds of stuff that that are completely beyond our control. But even the cells in our bodies are beyond our control. And try and imagine what would happen even if we could control them. There are, I, the last number I saw was several quintillion cells in your body. Now imagine you could give commands to each cell at one a second. It would take you millions of years to
Mm.
execute one command to every cell. It's not doable. And the same thing is true of the economy. It's beyond our ability to comprehend.
Yeah.
And in a centrally planned economy, they would they would hire somebody like me. They'd find an economist and say, "Okay, Dr. Doug, you run the economy." And I couldn't do it. Why
Mm.
not? Well, in order for me to run the economy, I would have to know what 9 billion people are going to buy next year, a year ahead, and what they're planning to make a year ahead. I don't know what my wife is planning to buy next week. How could
Mhm.
I possibly know what 9 billion people are going to do for a year out? It's just it's not a matter of not wanting to do it, not it's just an impossible task.
I think one thing to consider, if let's say we made you King Doug of the world, right? And you had this power. You also have to decide where to put your time and energy, your society's time and energy for research and development. So think about the car, right? Let's say Henry Ford came around. I mean, the car was created before him, but he popularized it with his innovations in industrializing the efficiency of putting these things together, and the design and standardizing it so you can take it to a mechanic and they'll be able to fix 10 years of different models. Before that, just it didn't exist. Things like every nut and bolt could have been handcrafted, which means that it wouldn't fit or be easily replaceable. But say Henry Ford came along, and right after he created the first assembly line of his Model T, we became you became King Doug of the world. Now you have to make this decision. We have cars. Do we need to keep making them better? You would say, well, no, we have some people who are still starving and can't figure out how to feed themselves. Maybe we should solve that problem first. And that's a very admirable problem to solve.
Mhm,
But then you don't get around to the part where you're actually making cars cheaper, more running more efficiently,
mhm.
creating jobs out of them, actually solving more homeless and feeding more people by feeding into an innovation society. Right. So I think there's always these pros and cons. But I was thinking that part of the well, I'll say this quote. I think it was a Churchill quote, and it's something along the lines of, "When I was young, I leaned
Yeah,
left because that's where my
yeah,
heart was, but the older I grew, I started leaning right because that's when my brain started kicking in." And you
yeah,
just kind of see the realities of the world, and I think that's very
yeah.
true. But
I
one,
think the earliest version I've heard was John Adams.
John, oh yeah, hey,
Basically,
let's really go
if you
back.
were
Yeah,
if
I love
you
that.
if you if you weren't a liberal, basically in your 20s, you don't have a heart. If you weren't a
Yeah,
conservative in your 40s, you don't have a brain.
yeah. And there's a
I
lot
just
to that. Here, I just mean on the economic front, but I mean that, yeah, that is a lot of what I mean here. And I think part of that is, I think in our formative years, our earliest our earliest observation of competition is zero sum. And what I mean by that is, if you consider a
right,
race or any sort of athletic competition, there's one winner. There's one person who's the best.
right,
People don't remember silver medalists as much as nearly as much as do the gold medalist. And that's not to say how
sure,
difficult it is to get second place in top
right,
competition, but there is one winner. And I think what people miss is that our economy is not zero sum, which is to say, an innovation here can help out with people all around the world. And
sure.
a very simple example of that is, if you increase the efficiency of farming, you're feeding more people. And I think it was, yeah, in your book you mentioned some examples of, if we have a very simplified economy, we have like five, three, four, five, 10 people, and you just imagine that they share very simple jobs, like one person is picking fruit and berries, three or four people are the hunters, two or
Yeah.
three people are the ones that are putting together tents, building tools, all that kind of stuff. But you already have like this labor, this division of labor. Or some people are going to be better than other people at things. I might be fantastic at climbing trees and taking down coconuts. You may be very good at building fires, and there's no reason I should be building
Exactly.
fires if you're better at it. It's a waste of
Right. Exactly.
societal efficiency.
Yeah. People don't understand that. Um, as you know, I was just came back from a vacation, and we have an airstream, and we go places and stay in it, and we love it. And it didn't happen this past trip, but on one not too long ago, uh, I was I was walking by a campsite with a uh, people in it that were camping in a tent, and they weren't talking about me because my airstream was parked quite a ways away, but they were looking at an airstream closer to them and said something like, "I just hate these airstream people. They look at
Yeah,
all them, look at all the people that could have been fed
yeah,
if
uh,
if they had spent that money on something else."
yeah,
And I actually, I don't know if I don't think it was in the book, but I actually wrote a piece about that, explaining that, man, the people that buy Airstreams are feeding hundreds of people that work for Airstream. They're feeding the people that make the tires that go on the Airstream. They're feeding the people that work at the dealerships that sell the Airstreams. They're on this last trip I took. I live out in the middle of nowhere, so we don't eat out very much, but we ate out a lot on our recent trip. So we're feeding the people at that restaurant. And so they don't understand that whenever you buy anything, you're putting money into the economy that helps people.
yeah.
And that's huge.
I think it's this notion that people have sometimes internalized this concept that money has grows on trees, or they've picked up that false belief. And I wonder. Oh, by the way, one thing we didn't you didn't mention there are the taxes. Every transaction that you make there is a tax rollover on that, and those do come back to fund social programs. And
That's
you say
right.
it in your book, and I agree with you on this, that there's a lot of value in social welfare done properly, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
now these cases we're just hearing a lot about fraud. I hope that it's overblown, but even the bits that I've seen verified are still concerning. Where it you don't want to pay taxes if you're not seeing actual social welfare being brought upon them.
Right.
And another point on social welfare, while we're on it, is I think the best programs are the ones that are conditional, which is to say, listen, we're going to help you to get you back on your feet, and it's a two-way street. You put in the time and effort, we'll give you the support,
Yeah.
and together we can make some magic. And there are a lot of success stories like that. The famous one is
Absolutely.
J.K. Rowling. Right? I know she's
Mhm.
English, but still,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
this Western
Sure.
concept. Um, this is funny though about the Airstream. I'm very much a city boy, right? Like, this is a great example. Imagine there was a centrally planned economy, and they said, "Hey, Hugh, we're gonna send you out to go camping," and they're gonna say, "Doug, we're gonna put you in the middle of New York City." And maybe you like New York, I don't know, but I don't like camping. I like my air conditioning too much. I hate mosquitoes too much. I like sleeping on a comfortable bed. Camping is one of those things where I'll it's an experience, but it's not my preference. I don't do it very often, but I want to make that decision for myself. And this is just, how to spend our leisure time, even with careers. I think we're both mathematically inclined, but I wouldn't be surprised if, I, well, what I studied and what I went to grad school for was not economically viable. And so the societal contribution dictated that, hey, there's one way I can be more valuable to society than another. And I made that, I accepted that deal.
Well, and I think that's a real key point is that in 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 my ideal world, what we would do is really support people in finding their talents.
Mhm.
And we don't do that very much. Uh,
Mm.
in schools, we tend to pass people along. We need to fail more people.
Mm.
Failure is not a bad thing. Failure is a really good thing. It's how we learn. If we never failed, we'd never learn anything. And I mean, I failed a lot and it's helped me tremendously.
Mhm.
Um, and and so yeah, we in my ideal society, we would find ways to help people find their talents. But then there's something else we would do, and that's to help them find their bliss.
Mm.
Find out what they just love doing.
Mm.
And then how to take those two things, their talent and their bliss, and create value for the world, create value for others.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the real key. And you and I are different, but right now, at least in my perception, we're right now working together with our talents and our bliss to try and create value for our listeners.
Mhm. Yeah, I that's a good reminder because I did mean to steelman the arguments against capitalism and for socialism, and I will do a little bit more of that. But a lot of that has to be based on actual social democracies, which is to say, you do have a capitalist environment which can generate revenue for the government, and the government come back and say, listen, we want to help out the entirety of our public, not just not just the ones that out competed everyone else. And I really like this idea of e- conceding that failure is a feature of capitalism. And I think that might be one of the reasons that capitalism is getting a bad rap is that failure is built in. But it's really experimentation, which is to
That's
say,
right.
look, you don't know if this restaurant is going to do well. You don't know if there is a if there's a market for, say, gourmet peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So, okay, it
Mhm.
turns out, at least I don't know if this is still the case, but gourmet donuts became a very popular thing in the last like 10 years. I don't know if it still is, but you started seeing these donut shops pop up that were like I I mean, I guess high quality donuts, but they're also high calories, so I avoided them. But they would be absolutely delicious. And there's still these things for like cookies, like very high quality cookies that are you're gonna break the bank on them um for the decorations and the taste.
Yeah.
I would probably advise for health, people share them if they're going to eat them. But that's an example of capitalism where people experimented with gourmet whatever and then found, hey, you know what? People really like highly decorated cupcakes and donuts, but peanut butter and jelly
Mhm.
sandwiches haven't made it, you know? And,
Yeah.
this is kind of frivolous, right? Because, like, a
Well,
donut isn't gonna
no.
save the world, but surgery will. Different
Yeah.
ways of
I,
of
I
of performing surgery will.
yeah, I don't think it is frivolous. I think that's actually pretty key because
Mm,
the difference is when capitalists try stuff, a lot of it doesn't work. It fails.
yeah.
But when government tries stuff, they're trying stuff on the same basis that the capitalists are, but they're doing it with our money.
Mm,
And they're doing it in a singular way. That is, there isn't somebody else getting to try something similar to see which one is better. The government tries it, and when it bombs, it hurts all of us.
mhm.
Whereas when something in capitalism fails, the only people that are hurt are the capitalists. And that's a really, really important thing to look at. I mean, we look at a recent example was Solyndra in the Obama administration. They poured a bunch of money into a company that was trying to make solar panels, and company went bust. And so
Mhm.
that was our money that went down the drain. If we had let Solyndra do it on their own, it would have been venture capitalists that lost their money, not the government.
That's a good point. And I mean, some of the irony of this is that solar panels have only gotten cheaper, and that market has only grown. And this government-backed one failed. So they
Mhm.
had more capital that was taken from our pockets and put into theirs, and they still didn't make it happen. It is interesting though because it's one of the this is like a human psychology issue that we need to confront, which is the homeless industrial complex. And I think California has done a really good example of showing us what that looks like in a very dissatisfying way, which is to say the amount of money and bureaucracy and administrative capital that went into solving the homeless issues in California have only made it worse. So they got more money, they hired more admin, they hired more bureaucracy, and they have more homelessness, not less. And there is this it's a perverse incentive. It's a really perverse incentive where if you're the head of the homelessness program in California, you have this perverse human desire to say, I want to maximize my authority and my organization, and I want to get as much money and admins on my team as possible, which means that you're
Yeah,
not actually going to be trying to get rid of the problem because you're going to get yourself out of a job, and well, in a properly functioning government, you would do such a good job on homelessness that you would then be pulled into other types of problems, but to solve and get rid of. But the reality is that if the government is doing a good job, it's gonna be shrinking.
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned homelessness, and I would point out that a lot of the way we deal with homelessness is actually it doesn't make sense because sheltering someone, which is usually what we try and do with government, is not the same as creating a home. They're still homeless,
Mm,
but they're sheltered.
yeah,
What we need to do is find ways to get people homes.
yeah.
And those are two very, very different problems, but government confuses them.
Michael Schellenberger wrote a wonderful book on this, San Francisco, and he focused on San Francisco, but he picked up other places as well, where if you look at the homeless population, there's this correlation between a homeless person and their inability to get off of drugs. So if you're on drugs, there's a higher chance you're homeless and vice versa. That correlation
Sure.
is there. The most successful programs around the country were the ones that said, listen, we'll shelter you, but we're also going to give you drug tests. And you're only going to get aid in the program if you're able to get off drugs. And they found a very high success rate with that, which is to say, listen, if you help yourself, we're going to help you and you are going to get
Hmm.
out of this. The problem is if you're in a society or in a program that says you're at no fault, we'll do everything for you, you don't need to take any accountability, those people do not succeed. It's treating them like children.
That's right.
It's not you're not helping them. You're not operating in their self-interest. You're enabling a bad habit that's only making their lives worse.
Yeah. And too many times we do that with a lot of different populations. Uh, if I say population X needs my help, what I'm really saying is I'm a lot better than the people in population X,
Mm,
and they can't survive without my help because they aren't as good as I am.
mhm.
And I think that's a really, really bad message to send to people. Um, I think there are lots of ways we can help people without more humbly, uh,
Mhm,
without acting like, well, you have to have my help because I'm better than you.
mhm.
But too often that's what we are doing to marginalized populations.
So something we've seen historically is that the people who are pushing for socialist revolution, like we're talking USSR, North Korea, Cuba, the ones who are in charge of that revolution, or the ones who are pushing for that revolution, are the ones who assume they're going to pick up that position of an elite decision maker, which means they get to live however they want to live, but then they also dictate how everyone else lives.
Right.
And what happens is there's not too many positions open. So, and then you end up with this hierarchy that is severely limited in how much freedom you have because you're answering to your boss who has ultimate authority in you or yeah, ultimately authority over you. And this is sort of the relationship like we have not seen socialism without fascism. We haven't seen those two things separated. And there's always this strong top down government authority in who are the regulators of socialism, and that gets bloody and violent very quick. I mean,
Yeah, that,
you say you're focused on evidence based economics, and the evidence is that any real socialist program has always ended up in a violent upheaval.
yeah, and well, it has to because you can't control the economy and give the people freedom at the same time.
Mhm,
Because if I decide that here's the kind of cell phone you have to have, and you want a different kind, well, what happens in North Korea? Well, there's a huge black market,
mhm,
and if you get caught using the black market, you are put to death.
mhm,
But there's still a huge black market. People want what they want, and if they they will find a way to try and get it, even on penalty of death.
mhm.
And so it, I wish someone who is leaning towards socialism would try and explain to me how you could possibly have an economy where you control the economy and still give the people freedom,
Yeah,
because the two things are absolutely incompatible. If you don't get to choose what you want to make and what you want to buy, what freedom do you have?
yeah. Let's get into the role of government that is something that we would agree is valuable. And some of the things that you write about are property rights, preventing and punishing crime,
Mhm.
investing in safety regulation, creating an environment of fair business competition, enabling meritocracy, supporting division of labor, and of course patent rights. That's a big one too. So
Sure.
these are all examples of where the role of government is very helpful. We want
Oh yeah.
firefighters, we want policemen, we actually do want judge, jury, and lawyers. Lawyers, as bad of a rap as they get, are a very important
Yeah.
part of American innovation.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have often been accused of being some kind of wacko laissez-faire capitalist that thinks that we should just let the system run amok, and nothing could be further from the truth. We
Mhm,
definitely do need government to put up the guardrails, just like with the environment, like we talked about earlier. Um, Stopping messing with the environment was a really good thing, but stopping other people from messing with it is a really good thing also. And so uh, we don't want a government that doesn't do anything. We don't want any kind of anarchy. We need a government that will set the guardrails. In a I don't remember if it was a podcast or a discussion not too long ago. Somebody said that the capitalists were responsible for slavery.
mm,
I said, well, that's crazy. And they said, well, yeah, but the capitalists were buying and selling people. And I said, yeah, they were. You let people buy and sell things, and they'll buy and sell anything you want. But it's the
mhm,
job of government to put the limits on that. And if the government lets people do that, it's the government's fault because it's clearly wrong. And
mhm,
so the government policing what happens in the economy is certainly not a bad thing. We need patent rights, we need property rights. Uh, we need all of those things to help make capitalism work. But what capitalism is really all about is not greed or acquisition or the true nature of capitalism is investing today for a profit tomorrow. And I would suggest that most people are capitalists. Uh, I run every day. Why do I do that? Because I think if I run every day, I'll have a longer, healthier life.
mhm,
I lift weights every day for the same reason. And I'm 78 years old. And so at my age, people think I'm crazy for doing this kind of stuff. But it's investing for the future. And hopefully I'll get an extra 2, 3, 4 years out of it. And more importantly, those 2, 3, or 4 years, I'll be able to walk around and run and do all kinds of stuff that I can do now. And that's really what capitalism is about. It's investing capital today for a profit tomorrow. And there's absolutely nothing bad or evil about that. And you mentioned earlier about uh, the idea of a fixed pie. And if you don't mind, I kind of wanted to go back to that because that that explains a lot about capitalism that people don't know. If
Yeah.
if we look back at history, we've got pretty good records from around the year one to today. If you look back at the from the year one to the year 1500 and look at what's called personal GDP, GDP per capita, that is the amount of stuff produced by the average person. Okay. From the year one to the year 1500, per capita GDP didn't change a drop. That is, the amount of stuff that each person was producing was a fixed amount. That's that fixed pie that you mentioned. Now, back then, the legend of Robin Hood was correct. The rich were the bad guys. Because if you have a fixed economy, if the amount of stuff per person is exactly the same and you want more, the only way to get it is to take it from somebody else. It's just a fact of life. If there's only so much stuff, the only way to get more is to take somebody else's, period. That's what the first 1500 years were like. Now, what changed? Well, around 1500, we started to get hints of capitalism. So from 1500 to about 1800, we had what you might call proto-capitalism. Uh, some people were looking for venture capitalists like James Watt with the steam engine and actually were able to make a little bit of progress. And in fact, in those 300 years, per capita GDP went up 40%. Now think about that. Just a little bit of proto-capitalism and everybody in the world is 40% better off. That's unimaginable almost.
Mhm.
Now in 1800, things really took off like a rocket because of the US. Because here we built a country on capitalism.
Mhm.
You mentioned patents. We were the first country in the world to have patents enshrined in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And that makes a big difference.
I think that's worth
And
repeating. I think that's worth
yeah,
repeating. Patent rights is in the Constitution. That's a short document. It's not a very long document, but our founding fathers
yeah,
found it important enough to say, this is the future. This is how a
yeah.
society thrives. If you
And
create
that's
something,
huge.
you
I mean,
deserve the rights of the rewards of it, at least for a period of time
yeah,
before your competition catches up.
yeah. I mean, it's hard to overstate how important that is. And what happened as a result? Well, from then to now, the whole world, just because of the US, the whole world is 18 times better off, not just 40%, 18 times better off
Mhm.
than they were in 1500. That's that's unimaginable. And that's strictly due to capitalism. Now, here in the US and some of the developed world, we're more like 40 times better off. And it's all due to capitalism. It's all
Mhm.
because that's what creates progress. Now, what's the difference? Why aren't the rich the bad guys today? The reason why is because of that growth. What capitalists are doing is making a bigger pie. So we're no longer in an economy where you get rich by stealing from other people. In
Mhm.
our economy, you get rich by making lots of other people rich. A quick example, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon.
Mhm.
Amazon makes I've done the numbers. Amazon makes the average American $2,000 to $3,000 a year richer.
Mm. And how is
It's
that?
saving because it's saving us money. Amazon has gigantic buying power and transmission power, and so because of that, they make things a lot less expensive.
Mm.
And so everybody is $2,000 to $3,000 a year better off. Now, people say, well, we have to take the money away from the rich. If you took all of Jeff Bezos' money and divided it up among the Americans, you'd get about $1,400 each. you're better off with the 2 to 3,000 a year he's making you,
Hmm.
because you'd only get that $1,400 once. And now Jeff Bezos is gone, no more Amazon, and you lose the $2 to 3,000 a year to gain a one-time payment of 1,400. It's
Mhm.
fuzzy thinking. It's stupid. It doesn't work.
I think there's
But
also. Go ahead. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I think there's a lot of unreal. When I say unrealized, unobserved gains that we get out of all these innovations. So let's say with like Amazon retail, you could order whatever you want at your fingertips. That could mean your book. It could mean a product. It could mean one of like 10 different ketchup brands. That's something that just easily ends up in front of my door. It's opened up a pathway to new products and services being created that wouldn't have otherwise. And the same is true. I work in tech. The same is very true in AWS. AWS was this first big cloud company out there, which essentially meant that you don't need as much capital to invest in your own data, in your own compute data centers as you need to before. Because Amazon allows you, AWS in particular, allows you to rent what you need. So you don't need to either oversupply your initial capital. You don't need to hire all these DevOps engineers. And you've kind of specialized what that tooling is, but you made it so much cheaper to start. So after the .com bust, when did AWS begin? I think S3 began in like 2008, 2009. But we
Mhm.
saw a whole nother round of startups kick off since 2010. Like Uber was one of them, and
Yeah.
that was only enabled. All these like services are enabled by cloud. Which yeah, okay, maybe you don't think about how much I saved. It's not always going to be like, oh, I got my TV for 20% less. It's partially going to be, hey, my taxi was like 50% less because this entirely new company sprang up out of nowhere.
Yeah. And well, and a lot of it too is in additional lifestyle, not just, it may not even be money, but, like, uh, uh, I don't know what machine you're using. I'm on a PC right now, and I live out in the middle of nowhere, so I'm talking to you on Starlink.
Mm,
Without Bill Gates and Elon Musk, we couldn't be having this conversation.
mhm.
I mean, those two guys made our lives immeasurably better.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put a price on it, but why would I complain about what they've given me?
Yeah, and you know what's so I'm on Mac, which is great, right? Because now Steve Jobs is in the mix, but they're competing with each other.
Yeah,
Steve Jobs made your PC better in the same way Bill Gates made my Mac better. They're
that's right.
competitors. They're trying to outperform each other. They're
That's
trying
right.
to take, they're trying to get capital, or they're trying to get con, a larger share of the pie, and in doing so, they're creating a larger pie.
That's right.
By
And
the way,
and
you mentioned Robin Hood, and I just had to throw this in there. Well, so first of all, I started watching Mel Brooks' Men in Tights, which Mel Brooks is just a phenomenal, phenomenal director. And actually, this is Dave Chappelle's debut on screen, which is kind of cool. But Robin Hood is, you mentioned it's the rich, and there's a uproar against the rich and a fight against them. The rich in this is synonymous with government because the rich were government. There were
that's right.
authorities that owned the land and you had to pay taxes and they were extracting rent effectively,
That's
rent in
right.
the economic term, which is that they were taking money without any value produced. This goes deeper, especially in European history, because we 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 hinted at this, but we didn't really get into it. There's this term, the word slave comes from Slav, right? And Slav
That's right.
was this pre-capitalist concept of feudalism where government authorities and lords owned the land and the commoners, which would have been something like 95, 97% of people, were were fortunate enough to live on those lands is the way the lords phrased it, but then they had to give up all their gains directly to the lords. And this is not just in the Slavic nations, it was a very large part of Europe. And I mean, the history of England is, I think there's a reason that we as Americans spend a lot of time on it, but habeas corpus and all that stuff. But even there was the Glorious Revolution in the 1600s that kind of gave rise to the practical implementation of what became our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Like human progress in these ways is very slow and steady. I mean, I think the best education for any of us would be if we had a time machine and we could just spend some time in the 1800s and then in the 1700s and then in the 1600s and go back just a little bit, because I think that will give us a lot of perspective of what we have. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for better, but it should help us at least understand the sorts of ideas that lead to progress versus the sorts of ideas that lead to a a a concentrated amount of power and authority.
Yeah, and that is where economics comes into it. Is that we don't want that kind of concentrated power,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
and I and there are ways to fix that. By the way, we maybe should take a little time and look at what's wrong with quote capitalism, and I would suggest it is government, and how do you fix that? Well, I would be the first to agree that capitalists, if you want to use that term, capitalists have too much control over government today. And so if people can buy an election, if people can, um, all these are really bad things. It's not caused by capitalism, though. It's caused by government allowing it to happen. And I think there's a lot we could do about that uh, if we, the people, start pressuring those in power to do it. Uh, the first thing I would suggest is making every bill that goes through Congress have an expiration date.
Mm,
Part of what causes a lot of our problems is that politicians have learned over the years that if they really push for something, they can get in a bill that's maybe marginally popular that will now last forever and it's very, very hard to get rid of.
mhm,
And so if a bill isn't good enough to be reauthorized every 5, 10, 15, whatever period of time, and maybe the period of time should depend on the kind of bill it is. There's a lot of stuff in there we could debate, but every bill should have an expiration date. And then if it turned out that it was a really good bill, sure, let's reauthorize it. But if it's not so good, let it die. The next thing I would suggest is that every bill has to be passed by a supermajority. Majority rules is a really, really bad idea for a government because how good can something be if only 51% agree with it? Or actually 50% plus one agree with it. Um, that's another reason we get a lot of really bad laws is that it's much easier to influence the government if all you have to do is influence a majority plus one, 50% plus one. If you have to convince three-fourths of the people or two-thirds of the people in Congress, it's going to be a lot harder for people with influence to control those people. It's going to take a lot more to do it. Next thing I would suggest would be every bill has to be a single issue bill. That's another place where all the bad stuff comes in, is they pack a bill with a bunch of garbage that didn't belong there to begin with. Every bill should just be one thing only, and we can see exactly how everybody voted on that whole thing. And finally, I think something that's well, I shouldn't say finally, but the next thing I guess I would say is we need to dramatically curtail lobbying. Um, and I think that's a lot easier than people think. A lot of people complain that, well, Citizens United made it so we can't do that. For our listeners that may not know, Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision that said that money is speech, and therefore you could use your money as free speech, however you wanted to. So you couldn't be prevented from contributing to political campaigns.
and that
I
gave
think there's
rise
an
to super PACs, right?
yeah,
That was sort of
and
the
I think
origins
there's
of
a
super
really
PACs.
easy way around that. you may not be able to restrict what people can give, but you can restrict what politicians can take, because that's not speech, that's listening. In other words, if
Mhm.
money is speech, taking money is listening. And so you can say that people have free speech, but you can't say that other people can be forced to listen. And so it would be very easy, I would think, to pass a rule saying, okay, you can only take $100 each from people, and you
Mhm.
can't take anything from corporations,
Mhm.
because we may not be able to describe who you talk to proscribe who you talk to, but we can prescribe who you must listen to. So I think we can get around Citizens United pretty easily that way. And finally, I think we need to try and restrict redistricting.
Mm.
And I think the simplest way to do that would be to say it has to match voter registration. In other words, you can redistrict however you want, but you have to look at how your state is composed politically, and whatever you do has to match that.
Can you give an example of what you mean by
Yeah, well,
matching the
there's several
composition?
states where um, I think Connecticut is one example where the registration is like 60% uh, Democrat and 40% Republican. And they only have one of, I think, 10 representatives in Congress, because redistricting has taken that 40% and taken it down to 10%.
Mm.
And the same could apply to racial boundaries. So, in other words, if your state or whatever has a certain ethnic population, that we have to match that with uh, your redistricting efforts.
So in this example of 60-40 Democrat Republican, you're
Yeah,
saying that the new if they want to redraw districts, they should be such that say there are 10 districts, 6 of those districts may be majority Democrat, and then the other 4 districts must be majority Republican,
yeah.
something like that.
If that's the way the the parties break out in their registration, and
Yeah.
that would solve a
Mm.
whole lot of problems too, because in any system, and capitalism is an economic system that deals with this all the time, and successfully. In any system, people will learn how to game the system to get what they want.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the world we live in. And what we want to do is eliminate people's ability to do that. Capitalism does that all by itself. In the economic world, it's very, very hard to game the system. It's nearly impossible if you aren't allowed to access government. In other
Mhm.
words, if you can't control government, if you're just staying in the economic realm of capitalism, there's no way to game the system. I can't do something to make my product sell better than somebody. You mentioned Jobs versus Gates. I mean, there's nothing that Jobs can do to make his product outsell Gates without making it a better product.
Mhm.
He can't do some trick that makes his product outsell another product without just making a better product. And so in the economic realm, capitalism does this all the time. But in the government realm, people have learned and learned and learned how to game the system. And
Mhm.
it happens. I mean, at the local level, I could spend the next 3 hours giving you examples of how people have gamed the system to make getting their political desires front and center, without necessarily doing anything better. And we have to find, as the people, we have to find ways to prevent that.
Mhm. Well, I can give you one example that I think is kind of funny. I think this was down in Florida in the early days of America. It's possibly a different country, but I think it was Florida, where they had too many snakes, and so there was a government program that said, if you bring us a dead snake, we will pay you.
Yeah.
The idea was very simple. If you're a farmer or whatever, you're out
Yeah.
there, you have your weaponry, you kill the snakes as you see them, and you just take out the population bit by bit. The reality was some folks gamed the system and said, "Hey, I'm just gonna make a snake farm, and then I'll kill
Mhm.
snakes." for my farm is very easy, and I'll get refunds on these things, and that's what happened. So you actually had an ecosystem where the entirety had more snakes, and if any of those farms had
Right.
a leak or a breakout, you end up with more snakes out there, and that happened as well. So it's
Yeah.
self-interest is something very difficult to follow the thread of. Thomas Sowell, for example, in his the entirety of his book, Basic Economics, was think about second order effects. If you focus on first order effects, you can come up with like really genius ideas. But then the reality is, once you go into second order effects, they can grow larger and larger. And I really like this first idea that you pitched. And I remember, I believe both Elon Musk and Trump both talked about this, which is garbage collection on your bills, which is to say, you write a bill, it has a limited expiration on it. It may be a bad idea. And if it's not a bad idea, then it'll be renewed without any consequences.
Yeah.
There are some issues.
Exactly.
I believe they call these earmarks. And this is the idea that, hey, I'm running for whatever, I'm running for a state position. I want the backing. Well, let's get into teachers because I know you have some stuff to say about the Colorado education system, and I wanted to get into that. But let's say that I wanted teachers to back me. I may come back and say, "Hey, listen, I mean, this is a bit of a larger idea, but I'll say, hey, I want 4 days of school per week with the same salary for my teachers, and I get all the teachers in my state to vote for me. That's great. Now, when we pass a bill, and this hits another point where you talked about single issue bills, where there might be someone in California that says, "Hey, almond farmers need water subsidies to grow their almonds." And
That's right.
that's not the best use of water. There's a lot better ways we could use that water. But it's kind of like I scratched your back, you scratched mine, tit for tat. It's multiple issues that get wrapped up in a single bill, and I say, "Hey, listen, I'm getting something back from my teachers, you're getting something from your farmers. It's at the expense of everybody else, but
That's
I'm
right.
making a select group of people happy." And so it's going to pass. And earmarks are our bills are littered with earmarks. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
sort of that is the game. That is part of the political game.
Yeah. I mean, the most obvious example of that was when they passed Obamacare, and Nancy Pelosi, in a speech before the House, said, "We have to pass the bill to learn what's in it." I mean, what kind of what kind? I mean, it's complete insanity. I
It
mean,
is. It
you're
is.
asking the people to vote on a bill that they haven't read and that they can only get to read it by passing it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Lewis Carroll couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, it's straight out of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, yeah. It's wild, some of these things that just happen. We allow it, and it just happens, and it's frustrating. And, I hope it's one of those things that the more we learn about these things, it's like sunshine is the best disinfectant, you know? And, there's one that really bothers me because I think there's unanimous agreement in terms of the citizen population that, we should not allow politicians any sort of insider trading. And that's another one of these things that is just flagrantly, um, accepted,
Mhm.
I don't think anyone's happy about it. It's one of those things where it's like, it's a victimless crime in a sense that, nobody is being directly harmed by it, but there's no moral authority that allows any congressperson to say, "Hey, I know I have a pretty good idea of what the next 6 months in the market's gonna look like because I make these laws, and I get briefs, I have insider information. Why shouldn't I invest why shouldn't I sell the stock that I know is gonna go down? Why shouldn't I buy this one that I know is gonna go up?" And it happens in the public eye, but and it's one that I think everyone agrees we should not allow this to happen, and it happens. It happens.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it certainly is not a victimless crime. I mean, that's the other thing that people often don't understand about economics is it's a system that's driven by these feedback loops. And as you mentioned earlier with the double pendulum, a tiny, tiny change can have a big effect on the whole system. And yeah, somebody fiddling with the economy by buying stuff that they have insider information on can definitely affect things in very negative ways.
Mm,
Um, it can boost a company that doesn't deserve to be boosted. That is,
mhm,
it can cause a stock price to rise when there's no actual value created there. Um, and it can cause a company to rise and then collapse. Uh, it's called overshoot and collapse. It can boost a stock price
mhm,
beyond its value enough that it can then collapse and hurt all the other investors that weren't involved in your little game.
mhm.
And so, yeah, it's not a victimless crime by any means. In fact, I would suggest that it's actually pretty hard to find an example of a victimless victimless crime, at least in the economy.
Mm. Well, what's funny about Pelosi in particular, and this is true of all of like many congressmen, but I'm picking on her because I think she's had more stock market success than her colleagues. There used to be on Twitter, back when it was still Twitter, it was Jack Dorsey's thing. There was a Nancy Pelosi trade tracker, and it was doing extremely well. And I think it was around for like half a year, and it gained a lot of followers. And it was tongue in cheek, but it was also, if you followed it and you bought according to those buys and you made those sells, you would do pretty well. But it got
Right.
banned. It got banned under Jack Dorsey, and I forgot what it was banned under, but it made no sense because this is public information. Just Twitter brought it out to people where it's easier to access. Now, Musk came in and he pushed stronger for freedom of speech, whether or not you like it. That's not the point of freedom of speech. The whole point of freedom of speech is that you don't like it. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah.
just the founding fathers. It was all the way back to Aristotle that said, hey, mob rule is not a good thing. And how do you prevent mob rule? Well, one of the ways is freedom of speech, is
That's
by
right.
Socratic debate. And you can't have that if you're suppressing speech, even if it's wild and outlandish, even if it doesn't make sense. The thing is, 100 years from now, it might make perfect sense. It shouldn't be illegal for me to say that the Earth revolves around the sun, and today it's not. But 600 years
Yeah.
ago, I would be putting my life on the line.
Yeah.
It's not right.
Governments tend to not like free speech. And in fact, you mentioned Socratic debate. Socrates was executed for it.
He died a hero.
Yeah.
So, Doug, you wrote something. There's an idea in your book that I'm actually surprised. I never heard of this idea before. It makes so much sense, and it's on how to tax gains on an investment. And at the moment, let's talk about what we have now, our current system. We have some light version of what you propose, which is if you have a short term capital gain. So let's talk about a capital gain. Capital gain is where you invest in something, you make a profit. So let's say I buy Nvidia at I don't know what the price is now, but let's say I buy it at 100 and it shoots to 200 within a year, and I sell within a year. I'm paying let's make it easier actually. So I buy Nvidia at 100, I sell at 150 within 1 year. If I do that, I pay taxes on the $50. That $50 profit, and that's going to be at my income level. So I put all
Yeah.
my income
Ordinary
together.
income.
That's what I pay.
Yeah.
If I lose $50, I don't get any. The government doesn't subsidize my loss, right? So I only pay if I win. Now this is short-term capital gains tax. Long-term capital long-term capital gains tax is if I hold for a year at minimum and then I sell, I still only pay taxes only on the profit, not on what my initial investment was. And that's going to be at a different income, at a different level of brackets, and that's usually quite a
Yeah.
bit less,
A
like
lower rate.
a lower rate,
Yeah.
a lower rate. So you write about booms and busts, and I think we should talk maybe about booms and busts first. And you had mentioned overshoot, because your proposal on how we do capital gains tax is a modified version of short term versus long term. It's a little bit more intricate at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, okay, this kind of makes sense, and it's very outsized. It's like if you sell within a year, you're not going to make much. And there's a very good reason for that. So can you tell me a little bit about what these boom bust cycles are, and how you think they can be, well, what is the value of them? You know, why do they arise, and how you propose that we could do a better job of managing them, and still get the investment and
Sure.
innovation and gains out of them.
Well, boom and bust cycles, you follow a, a really consistent pattern. Uh, what typically happens is some kind of investment becomes attractive. The first one that was studied really heavily was tulips in Holland, 1400s. Um, Somebody started importing tulips, and it attracted investors. People would um, help them do that, and they started making a lot of money. People, oh wow, these tulips are really beautiful, and so we're going to buy these tulips, and so pretty soon, lots and lots of people were trying to invest in tulips, but they were people that weren't used to investing and weren't particularly doing it very wisely. And so as the price of tulips went up, they kept following the price, buying more and more and more tulips, and eventually, so so much was bought that it way exceeded the actual value of the tulips in the tulip market. So people were buying tulips for more than they could be sold for by quite a bit. And so then the market crashed and everybody lost their money.
Hmm.
Basically. This happens a lot. I mean, um, I want to say it was JP Morgan, but I could have the wrong guy. Um, just before the Great Depression, sold off most of his stock. And he said the reason he did that was because he was at a shoe shine stand and the shoe shine boy was offering him stock tips. And he said, if if this is the thinking that's in the market right now, I don't belong in it. And so he sold all his stock and didn't end up losing all his money because, but that's typically the problem is that you start out with real investors that are investing in something because it actually makes sense. They're looking at the fundamentals and going, is this a fundamentally good investment? But then it quickly follows by people in the market. We call that the technicals that are looking at what's happening in the market and just betting based on what they see happening, not based on the fundamental worth of the companies they're investing in. And that's what happened in the 2000 boom that you mentioned earlier, the tech boom. People were buying tech stocks that knew nothing at all about tech stocks. They weren't looking at, is this company really worth what I'm paying to buy a share in it, or am I just buying a share in it because? And then we saw the same thing in 2007, 2008 with the housing boom. People buying houses and flipping them, and um, they were not buying houses, making big improvements in them, and then selling the house based on the cost of the improvements they put in. They were buying the house, waiting a couple of months, and selling it with no improvements based on the fact that the market for housing went up. Well, first of all, that none of these things contribute to the economy. They're not helpful at all. And true investment is what the economy needs. Throwing money into the economy is not a good thing. It ends up overvaluing assets and making things not work out well at all. So the tax that I propose, again, that we could quibble about the numbers, but um, is is to look at the tax. Oh boy, this is going to be tough to explain to your viewers without graphs and stuff. Um,
Exponential decay.
yeah, it's an exponentially decaying function um, that means that if you were to buy something and sell it a minute later, the tax on it would be 100%. You would, every piece of the profit you made would have to be paid to the government.
Hmm.
Um, After a year, maybe 90% of it would be taxed. taken in tax. So if you, if you bought it for 100 and sold it for 200, you'd only get to make $10 profit. That was not taxed. The other 90% would be taken away. Um,
Yeah,
after,
I'll throw on an
oh,
image
go
for
ahead.
listeners here.
Okay.
So in your book, I have it in front of me. I think you put T to the 0.75 T.
Yes, it
Again,
was
the number doesn't really
0.75.
matter. But the point is that you have some decaying function. So after, say, like 2 days, you're going to pay nearly 100% of taxes
Yeah,
on your gains. So there's no reason to buy and sell so quickly. After 1 year, in your book, you have it plotted out. I think it's about I'm going to say about 85% of your gains you would pay in taxes, which
yeah,
is still you don't invest for that small of a
no,
outcome. But after
yeah,
like 15 years, it drops to something like 2 to 3%. So
yeah,
if you're a long term holder, this thing is effectively negligible.
yeah. And this is, I mean, this is going to affect average people dramatically. So, for example, if I buy a house and flip it a month later, I'm not going to make any money on the deal. But if I buy my house and keep it for 30 years, I'm not going to pay any taxes when I sell that house.
Mm,
It's going to basically be tax free. And and that's important because it first of all helps the individual that's truly investing, but second, it helps the economy because we want people to put money into the economy to make the economy grow. Economic growth is what helps all of us. It's what it makes the pie bigger. And making the pie bigger requires investment. It
mhm.
doesn't require flipping assets.
I think we
And
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to point out one, it may not be very obvious to people who haven't thought about this that we don't live in a zero sum world. And I'll call out sort of, I think, the biggest example of how that proves that we're not in a zero sum world. And this goes back to Thomas Malthus. And there was the whole idea of the Malthusian theory, which said that human population, this was in 1800s, the human population is growing at an exponential rate, but the food supply is growing at a linear rate. So at some point, a lot of people are going to die of starvation. There's an upper limit to how many people we could support in the world when most of the world were farmers. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I'm going to ballpark 80%. Could have been higher, could have been lower globally. But we had that many farmers, that many people producing food, and they were producing it too slowly to keep up with the global population. So there was this concept that, yeah, in a zero sum world, there's a carrying capacity that we're going to hit. 200 years later, and the global farming rate, I believe, is less than 5%. It could be as low as 3%. That could just be America. But globally, I would be shocked if it's any more than like 7%. Even that would be a very high number, in my opinion. Or I shouldn't say opinion, that would be, that's evidence based. But 7% of the population is producing food. And in developed countries, our biggest problem is obesity, not malnutrition. So that is sort of that is a large scale, long term proof, evidentiary proof that we do not live in a zero sum world. So we cannot, we cannot operate on that assumption.
Yeah. And you mentioned obesity. I mean, that's another good example of the government interfering in a complex system and screwing it up. In the 70s, uh, the government is based on really just two people that neither of which had a nutrition background. And I think it's in my book. I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure it is.
yeah.
Um, and uh, got themselves in a position to influence the government. And and this is the problem with government that intervenes. Their belief was eating fat makes you fat.
Yeah.
And
It
so they
sounds
got
right,
the government.
doesn't it? It sounds great. It sounds obvious. It sounds obvious
Yeah,
when you say it.
yeah. So and so the government created this food pyramid and
Yeah.
put carbohydrates on the top and all the way down to fat at the bottom and encouraged people to eat carbohydrates and not eat fat. And the result was an obesity epidemic.
Mhm.
You can actually look at w-
Yep.
how it happened and watch the track as um, it's just incredible because the government got involved in something that they shouldn't have gotten involved in. Um, because I mean, first of all, if you think about it, it doesn't even make sense. As I mentioned earlier, I run, I lift weights. My diet is going to have to be very, very different from someone who's more sedentary than I am.
Mhm.
It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And expecting that all people should have a similar diet, that that a, a 400-pound sumo wrestler should be eating the same amount of food and the same kind of food as a 90-pound Pilates instructor is insane.
Mhm.
People are different. And that's another problem that government often has is they take a one size fits all approach. And one size very, very seldom fits all.
I was really happy to see that example in your book. I read a book called "The Case Against Sugar" by Gary Taubes, and it writes
Mhm, I
about
read that.
the sugar complex, and it's very much this. In fact, there's a lot of analogies between pro sugar and pro cigarettes, pro
Mhm.
tobacco from like the 50s. You know, you could look back in magazine articles in the 50s, and you have doctors prescribing cigarettes after dinner. You know, like use this to relax, and they had no idea the part. There was a time when they legitimately did not know about the carcinogens, and they did not know
Yeah.
about the negative effects of smoking. But even once that actual evidence started coming out, there was still there was a transition period where cigarettes were still considered a healthy practice. And very
Yeah.
similarly, the same thing happened with sugar, where the idea was, hey, you know, sugar gives you, it boosts you with energy. It's a good thing to have. It doesn't cause tooth decay. It doesn't cause any issues in your health. And I mean, my own personal experience, I remember um, there was a period of time when you saw a lot of food that came in low fat. And so you would see something like low fat
Right.
ice cream and it still tasted good. And the reason is they loaded it with sugar. So it wasn't as
Mhm.
filling. I mean, you know, now I think I hope more people know about this, but fats are good for your hormones. Fats are good, you know. It doesn't mean you can overindulge in them. You can even have a little bit of sugar, but you cannot overindulge in it. And the threshold to overindulge in sugar is quite low, actually. So it's best to avoid those as much as possible. But these are all these are all bits and pieces where you know the we needed the complexity to come out, and giving broad strokes of recommendations set us backwards for a bit. There's a couple more
Yeah.
examples, bloodletting, right? Like that's the old
Mhm.
practice
Sure.
of when you're hurt or injured, they would put leeches on you, and it's like medieval Europe. They would put leeches on you, thinking that they were helping you by removing the bad blood from your body, and it was just
Mhm.
not understood at all how the body worked. So, all right, there's still so many things that I think are interesting to get into, and we skipped over a couple things. Um, You did mention, you know, tulip mania, I think is hilarious because, I learned about tulip mania as I was learning about Bitcoin. And, one thing that was not in your book, and I was hoping to see it was, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin? You do talk about the gold standard, but you did not mention Bitcoin, and, I wonder why.
Well, it's first of all, it's a new idea. And
Mhm,
so I I think it's always wise to be cautious about new ideas,
mhm,
investing economically. Um, I have a little bit of it, probably less than 1% of my investment.
mhm,
Um, but I also know several people who have lost quite a bit.
mhm,
Um, I know one person told me he lost $40,000. Um, um, it's um, it's an interesting idea, and
mhm,
we'll have to see. I guess I would say that's another big problem the government has is that we can't tell the future,
mhm,
and what looks like a good idea very frequently turns into a not so good idea because of changes that happen in the future. Uh, a good example would be what's happening with Social Security. Uh, Whether or not you buy into the initial idea, the initial way it was set up, it it could have worked if the world hadn't changed.
Mhm.
But the world changed, and people don't work the way they used to work. They don't work in the kinds of jobs and industries they used to work in. They live a lot longer, and so all of these things created a situation where the system has to end up breaking. Um, the system as it was intended to work will not work anymore. It's going to have to, some changes are going to have to be made, uh, or it's going to go away.
Let's get into that.
Uh,
Let's get into Social Security from the beginning. So this is at
sure.
the tail end of the Great Depression. People are suffering,
Yes.
and the government is getting involved in thinking, how can we make? I believe this was made in good intentions. Um, I mean, I think a lot of economic policy, I even believe a lot of socialist policy is built out of good intentions, just ill
I
conceived.
agree.
So, this one with Social Security, the current state, as you alluded to, is not sustainable. The current state is not. It is not investment. The current state of Social Security is wealth transfer. It's folks who are under 65, or there's a small range of when you can start taking out Social Security. E- Someone who's retired and they apply for the program and they start getting funds. It's a transfer of wealth from a younger population that is producing. They get taxed, it's taken from their pocket and put into the older population's pocket. And when this thing was initially created, there's a couple things that I know of, but I want to hear more about it. One is the lifespan was lower, so the amount of years that were being paid out was it more sustainable. And I do not believe it was a direct wealth transfer. I believe it was an investment program. I could be wrong about that, but and I do want to hear your thoughts, and I do want to say I think this is super important. I do think we should be a society that takes care of our elders. By the way, one thing that really bothers me is when I sign up for insurance. Um, I don't have kids, but if I had kids, I would be allowed to put them on as dependents. But I am not allowed to put my older non-working parents on it. So if my parents are retired, they're not eligible for me to help them in that way. And I thought that's very strange because it's an interesting concept to me. I believe we should be helping both. So, well, I guess my question to you is one, how was it initially conceived? And two, how do you think we can improve it?
Well, like I say, I agree with you. I think most things that even socialists want to do are basically well-meaning. And I it's one of the hazards, I guess, of being what many people would call a conservative economist, that they don't understand that people like you and I can care about people as much as they do, but just see different avenues for how to help. And I would suggest that the things that you and I are talking about are ways that will actually help people more, but by in some ways doing less. I guess is a way to put it. I mean, in many respects, I'm a poster child for what's wrong with Social Security. Um, as mentioned earlier, I exercise a lot. I think I've got a good chance at making it to 100. Now, if I make it to 100, what does that mean? Well, it means I started working well, I actually started working at 11, but really working, let's say 22, and worked till I was, let's see, I think I was 57 when I retired from formal employment. Uh, and so I worked for what, 35 years, thereabouts. And now from 57 to 100, I'm going to not work for a good deal longer than that.
Mhm.
Well, let's see if we can figure out how that works. I mean, how can I spend, let's just pick some silly numbers, 5 years working and then spend 10 years not working and make that somehow work out
Mhm.
as a society? Well, clearly it can't. I mean, the work's got to get done, the money's got to be made somehow. And it's only going to happen if we spend more time working than we spend not working. Now, in my case, actually, I'm still working in the sense that I write books and I blah, 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 blah. But, but there are a lot of people out there that aren't doing that. And they're retiring at 65 after working for, let's say, from 25 to 65, 40 years, and then 65 to 95, 30 years. There's no way to make those numbers work out. And
Mhm.
so we're having people work less than half of their lifetime. And in fact, if you count their childhood, they're working way less than half of their lifetime.
Mhm.
So they lived to be 90. They worked for um, 40 years, let's say. And now they've not been working 50 years and worked for 40 years. There's just no way to make those numbers work.
Mhm.
And so, how do we fix it? Was your real question. And we have to fix it by balancing those kinds of things. I think the first thing is to means test it. And I think you sort of alluded to that. I mean, honestly, why should I be getting Social Security? I don't need it. I mean, um, I've planned well for my retirement, and I'd be perfectly comfortable without Social Security. And if they means tested it, they probably wouldn't give it to me. Now, the reason they put it in the first place was to make it seem fair that, okay, we're going to do the same thing for everybody.
Mhm.
But again, that's a big problem with government is they approach things as a one size fits all problem.
Mhm.
The second thing is that you also alluded to is where's the money in the meantime? And I think Trump has already proposed something like this, but uh, the Australian system, I think he referred to it as,
Mhm.
where the money goes into your own account. They, the
Mm.
government can still take money out and it goes into an account that belongs to you. And you have some control over how it's invested.
Mhm.
But basically, the government doesn't let you do anything really stupid with it. And so you come out and retire with this fixed amount of money. And the government may even have to put rules on how early you can retire because some people might look at a pile of $1 million and go, well, gee, I can retire when I'm 40, and then find out when they get to be 60 that they retired way too early
Yeah.
and the money's gone. Uh, although, by the way, I should point out the government does have some rules right now. Um, I'm sure you're familiar with it. If you want to invest in certain things, you have to be what's called a qualified investor.
Yeah.
And so if you get an idea to invest in something great, if you don't already have $1 million, literally, that's one of the tests. You have to have $1 million, not counting your home, the value of your home, in order to invest in a qualified investor investment. And so you're preventing people from actually investing in something that might be good if they're both smart and not rich.
Mhm.
Now, their intent was to keep people who didn't know any better from investing in risky things that would lose them money. But again, they're doing a one size fits all. They're assuming that if you don't have a lot of money, you must be not very smart at investing, and therefore we're going to prevent you from investing so you can get a lot of money. This again, we're back to Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland.
Mhm.
Um, but so yeah, how do we fix it? The first thing is means test it. The second thing is dramatically adjust the retirement age.
Okay. Can
When
you
Social Security
explain
for
before moving on
Mhm.
to increasing the age? What exactly is means testing?
Okay, it means that we look at, does this person need the money, or are they already well enough off without it? And you mentioned that there are a bunch of scandals out there now about people gaming the system,
Mhm,
and that's a whole lot of it. Is they're gaming the system by being on SNAP, food stamps,
mhm,
and driving a Maserati.
mhm,
Uh, that that things are not well enough means tested often, and Social Security, I think, is one of them. Now, if you had a system where it was your own personal investment, like we just mentioned,
mm,
what Trump calls this, then that wouldn't be a problem.
mhm,
Fine, if if the only one putting money in, it's my money, and uh, I can I can then taking it later is not an issue.
mhm,
But right now, as you mentioned, there are people in their 30s that are paying for my retirement when I don't need their money. And is that really the way we want the system to run? And I would suggest it probably isn't.
mhm,
That people that don't need the money uh, probably shouldn't be getting it. Now, again, I understand the fairness issue. That yes, I did pay in all my life, and and should I get some of that back? And if I'm forced to pay in that way, maybe I should get it back. But that's a fault of the way the system is designed. In other
mhm,
words, uh, and then the other thing is the retirement age. When
mhm,
Social Security started, 10% of the people lived beyond retirement age. And now almost everyone lives. It's
mm.
90% live beyond retirement age. And and that's the problem. The world has changed. The people that wrote the Social Security Act um, had no way of knowing what was going to happen in the future.
These
And
these are both uh, I think politically these things would struggle immensely to get passed.
of
They're kind
course,
of like earmarks. No, not enough people are gonna be able to politically swallow this proposal. It has to be like a lame duck presidential executive order, something crazy like that, and then forever they
yeah,
would be hated. I do think Trump is the kind of guy that could do it. Like, I think he is. I mean, he is one of the guys that could say, I don't care if you guys hate me. I'll do what I think is right." It takes someone with that kind of fortitude to say, to be able to enact on something like this. Because it is a tough one. It's definitely a tough one. And as I said earlier, I do believe in a society that does take care of their elderly. I think that's important for. I mean, it this is where it gets tricky. Maybe you've heard this phrase before. I'm a socialist with my family, but I'm a capitalist with everybody else. And that's kind of how I think sometimes I feel about this, where it's like, yeah, we should take care of people who have given their wisdom, time, and energy to our society.
yeah. I think that's a really good way to say it. I think that's a lot of the reason why people think socialism might work. I think people are always socialists with their families,
Mhm,
and yes, we're going to help our family no matter what.
mhm,
And um, but even within family, uh, people that have money uh, are typically very careful about how they help their family with it. Uh, I know my financial planning is set up in such a way that I'm not going to give a whole bunch of money to people when I pass, because my experience has been that giving people a whole bunch of money is a really bad. It doesn't help them; it hurts them.
mm,
And so I've tried to design it in a way that will give them a little help to try and get them, if they need the help, um, um, but not enough to be abusive. And like I know Bill Gates has started to scale back.
mm.
Um, he's starting to see that giving a bunch of money to people is not a really good thing. Uh, and and that's, I guess, sort of the problem is that government tries to adopt a lot of the role of parent,
Mm,
but they're not in a position to be a loving parent.
yeah.
I know what my kids need and want, and what's I have certainly not a perfect idea or anything close, but I have a better idea of what's good for them than somebody 3,000 miles away might have, thinking of them just as an entity.
Hmm.
And um, and I think that's what we need to look at is how can we make the government do things in a way that is more caring, that that where they can actually learn. And part of that, I think, means making it much more local. Uh, I
Mm,
would be much more in favor of when the government takes money in taxes, distributing it to local agencies rather than trying to do, because, I look around in my neighborhood and I know who's pulling their weight as it is and who's not. And I'm sure that's probably true of you too. Uh, we can look around and we see what's going on. And so I know who's gaming the system and who's not gaming the system. And if I were on a board that it was my job to help people in need, I could I could more readily identify who was in need and who was not.
hmm.
And I think that's a way to approach it. I think too often the safety net turns into a hammock.
Mm.
Um,
There was some of what you discussed. Do you know who Vivek Ramaswamy is, or have you heard his name? He
I do.
Yeah, he ran in 2024. But
Mhm.
he talked about inheritance tax in a very non-conservative way, which was kind of interesting. And I've been thinking, I still don't know, like I have trouble deciding exactly where I land on this, because his idea of inheritance tax is, he says he wants it extremely high. And the reason is that he wants any sort of funding to the next generation to be based off of services. So, for example, if you have his idea is that if you have children, you can invest as much as you want into their schools, into piano lessons, into tutoring, into learning soccer, into whatever, any of these services, you're more than welcome to invest in. But when it comes to like cold hard cash in someone's hand, his the philosophy that he's purporting for high income tax is that this is going to do more damage than good. It's kind of like I wish I could think of a less gruesome analogy, but it's like giving you your own rope to, let's say, to hang your ambitions to make it less gruesome. But
Sure.
that's the concept. But I
Well,
did I one thing I did do, and I was curious about this. I looked at lottery winners. So there's this sort of anecdotal story that makes the front news, which is that when someone wins the lottery, they end up blowing it very quickly, and then within, depending on how much money they make, within 5 to 10 years, they're back to where they started. I did look up some of the stats on this, and it does seem that at least in majority cases, more than 50% people who win the lottery actually don't end up in that front page route. So that is somewhat promising, but it still does beg the question of what are the right support architecture? Like, what's the difference between giving someone a winning ticket to life versus giving them the tools to win themselves?
mhm.
By the
Yeah,
way,
I think the overarching point is has a lot of value. Um, Dealing with it by having the government take the money, I think, is not the ideal way to do that. Um, I think part of the problem is where the money is the first problem.
mm,
So, in the simplest example, let's look at a family farm. And where I live, there are a lot of family farms. So, well, recently, one of my neighbors that owned a family farm passed away and left the farm to his children. Now, if he couldn't have done that, what would have had to have happened? Well, in order for the government to take their chunk of it, the farm would have had to have been sold. And
Mhm.
rather than continuing as a family farm, it would have become something else.
Mhm.
And so, and what has happened here in reality was the kids took over and kept working it as their father had.
Mhm.
And I don't, that's a different issue than giving somebody a wad of cash.
Mhm.
And again, that's part of the problem with government. We have to look at what's really going on on a case by case basis, as it were, rather than making some big blanket thing.
Mhm.
You know, and people talk that no, similarly, there's a lot of call right now for a wealth tax
Mm.
without looking at what that really means. A wealth tax would be a disaster for the economy because what does it mean? Let's say, okay, we put a wealth tax on Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk doesn't have millions of dollars sitting in a bank somewhere. That's people's picture, but it's the wrong picture.
Mhm.
Okay. People that have money almost never have a big bank account. Their money is tied up in investments. And so, what would have to happen if you take 20% of Musk's wealth?
Mhm.
He's going to have to sell off assets to people that aren't going to be able to manage them as well as he has proven that he could manage them.
Mhm.
So, he's going to have to sell off like SpaceX. So, what's going to happen? The Starlink that I'm talking to you on now is going to be in jeopardy because it's going to be bought by somebody who can't run it as well as Musk has been running it.
Mhm.
And so we are all going to suffer because that happens. And that's what's always going to happen if you take money from people that you think have money, that have wealth, if you want to call it that. But it isn't money sitting in a bank that they can just go, okay, here you go, here's money.
Mhm.
Um, and the same thing is sort of true of an inheritance tax. There will be some people that will inherit actual money, but probably most of them, my guess is Elon Musk's heirs are gonna uh, uh, they're gonna get stuff, stocks, bonds, investments, not actual cash.
Mhm.
And so how that goes is going to depend on how well Musk has trained his prodigy. You mentioned Trump earlier. Uh, his kids look pretty well trained
Mhm.
to be able to take over the assets that he leaves behind.
Mhm.
Uh, and they also seem pretty well trained to not deal with money foolishly. And so, it becomes a really tricky issue. Would there be some advantage maybe in the government passing a law that you can't give somebody X amount of cash at a time? Maybe. But the government doesn't take it. It just sits where it sits and they can only take a certain amount out of it. Something like, again, I'm talking off the top of my head. I haven't thought this through real well yet, um, but I think there's a place for regulation. But the idea of taxing it, I can't get behind that. I
Mhm.
think that uh, whenever a tax on anything is a punishment for what you did to get the money,
Mhm.
basically. And that's why I would prefer a national sales tax. I don't mind
Mm.
a tax on people spending money, but I sure hate the idea of punishing people for making money.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just, you get taxed not on your production, but on your consumption is the idea that you
Yeah.
propose. So there's
And
a
by the way, most of the so-called uh, social democracies do have a very, very large consumption tax. In
mm,
Britain, it's called the VAT, value added tax. It's about 20%.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean there's a lot of interesting points you brought up. One thing I want to just kind of give a quick applause for is this idea of decentralized interstate competition within the US. I've never seen a country that has interlocality competition in the way that America has. And I think that is one of the
Mhm.
things that keeps this country like after 250 years still alive and thriving and still, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of challenges now, but it's still going. And we saw this with the wealth tax. We've been seeing it for years actually. Since COVID is at least when I could definitively say we've been seeing it where states like New York and California have been getting more expensive for businesses to run and the regulations have increased and we've seen more and more of California losing its I mean, it's still a tech like San Francisco is still a leader in the tech space, but we are seeing more decentralization. And same with New York, we saw like Ken Griffin go south and there's I forgot there's a couple of other cases. I can't remember exactly which companies, but where finances and banking is decentralized. Now, New York and California has had such a long lead for so many years that they're still the leaders of those industries today. But we are seeing the cracks and the leaks happening now. And this wealth tax was a really good example of that happening. And that doesn't just happen in the state level. It's not just Californians, especially wealthy Californians, leaving the state and conducting their business elsewhere. It's also countrywide, where we're seeing, especially European countries, who are increasing their taxes, and business leaders are leaving. Say for common places are coming to the U.S. or going to UAE, where it is easier to conduct business, and
Right.
they're still operating their business in Europe, but, like, Europeans are just getting those services at a slower and higher tax rate. So,
Yeah.
it's yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we have to follow the winds where they go to understand the consequences of these ideas.
Yeah. And yeah, it's fascinating. The governor of California, Newsom, um, ha- has now come out against the wealth tax
Right.
in California, but he says we need to make it nationwide. So he thinks he's learned the lesson that if if we make tax the wealth put up a wealth tax in California, people will move to Texas. But he hasn't learned the lesson that if we put the wealth tax in the U.S., they're going to move to Dubai.
Yeah.
People will find a way to pursue their self interest. And to me, the beauty of capitalism is that it's the harness. It's the thing that takes self interest and
Mhm,
makes it help everybody. It forces a system where if you want to succeed, you have to do stuff for other people.
mhm.
If you want to succeed, if you want to make money, you've got to find a way to create value for others.
Yeah.
You've got to find a way to do something like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. You've got to make the world a better place if you want to make a lot of money for yourself. And no other system does that. Every other system tries to get you to go against your self interest. And and in fact, that that was my first experience that I can recall with socialism. Is I think I was probably about 12. And I was talking to a woman. I honestly don't even remember. I don't remember whether it was a teacher or a relative. But there was an adult woman was trying to explain to me how wonderful communism was. And as a 12-year-old, I said, that's not going to work.
Mhm,
And she said, what do you mean it won't work? And I said, well, you're expecting that people are going to be saints, that,
mm.
that they're going to consciously go against what's best for them. And you're never going to get people to do that. And, and yeah, I mean, if I could see it as a 12-year-old, you would think that other people could understand it better.
There's a whole field of behavioral economics, and this is tying our psychology to our economic decisions that we make. And this is, I think, Amos and Tversky had that, or well, Tversky passed. I think I forgot which one to pass, but I forgot their names. It was these two guys that did a lot of research in the '70s in Berkeley and Israel, and they eventually wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it kind of goes into like the way we make our decisions, and that has to do with operating under a certain amount of decisions and freedoms that we have. And it's what's something you mentioned quite early on was this idea of operating within self-interest, and you had the analogy with our biology. And there's this Richard Dawkins wrote this book, The Selfish Gene, and the whole idea was that at what level are we selected for in our evolution? And the way we commonly learn it is it's the evolution of species, which is to say, like, my evolution is for the sake of the entirety of the human race. What Richard Dawkins is to say, well, that has some faults in it, and if we go deeper into it, it's actually the survival of the gene. The gene is looking out for itself. It's this one little thing, a much smaller part of our body that's just operating within itself to survive and replicate, and it has emergent properties. The idea being that if you put all these genes together, you don't just get a super gene, you get an entirely different being. And this is how you're kind of the analogy was this is similar to the economy. You cannot base your understanding of an economy on buying a pencil, on your experience of going to Office Depot and buying a pack of pencils. That is one very microscopic decision that is hiding the full truth for itself. Um, so I know we're at a couple of hours here, and there's actually a couple more things that I wanted to at least touch on before we get going. And one of them is this book was the majority of the book was to highlight exactly what socialism is and to distinguish it from a social democracy, which is what I think when most Americans hear that word socialism today, in this day and age in 2026, they're thinking social democracy. I don't think they're thinking in the 1950s USSR or North Korea or Cuba. And you really highlight that difference, and we go through all the assumptions that socialism needs to survive and why it just between the theory of what you lay out and the evidence of what we've seen in all practices, it just hasn't panned out. Now, your next book you mentioned, and I was really happy to hear. Let me say you have one chapter in here that I saw, which was called "Crony Capitalism," and that highlights all the deficiencies of capitalism, but with a caveat that those practices are something that can be eliminated. And there is a role of government, and there is also an abuse of government, and we need to be careful on how capitalism or some capitalists will try to take the easy way out, and instead of competing on value, they compete on regulation and moats, and that's not the way that we're proposing for a capitalist society.
Yeah.
But your next book, I think, is going to dive deeper into that. Can you tell us a little bit
Yes,
about that?
absolutely. Well, it's going to be why capitalism struggles, and capitalism struggles because government messes with it. And I should go back to what you said a minute ago, using the example we talked about in the human body, and say that while it's not practical for my brain to try and control my body, there are times when the self-interest of my cells is a problem. We call that cancer.
Mm,
And that's when some of the cells in my body get crazy about self-interest and try and glom onto all the resources that the body has. And at that point, my brain does have to engage and go, now I'm going to be the government.
mhm,
I'm going to go get treatment. I'm going to get radiation or chemo or surgery or whatever I need to stop those runaway cells from exploiting the rest of the body. And that's crony capitalism in your body.
mhm,
That's when it's gotten out of control, and there's a, a, a definite role for government to step in and stop it. And that's I can't think of an example, and believe me, I've tried, of a fault of capitalism that a perceived fault of capitalism that actually isn't a fault of government.
mm,
That it's something that shouldn't be happening, but is because government allows it to happen.
mhm,
And and to me, that's the critical difference. Just like what we talked about with the environment, is not messing with it. Let the environment, let the economy, let your body do what it does. but put up guardrails and make sure that the things that happen there are things that are good for the body,
Mhm.
things that are good for the environment, things that are good for the economy by not letting other people mess with it. So I wouldn't want, as far as I know, I don't have cancer right now. And if I don't, I don't want somebody coming in and giving me cancer treatment.
Mhm.
And that would be an example of crony capitalism is some allowing somebody to mess with my body and or the economy or the environment. It's the government's job to keep those guardrails up and make sure that the system functions the way the system functions
Mhm.
and keep the bad actors out of it. And so whether it's cancer or whether it's uh, paying people to kill snakes or whether it's um, putting in price controls, all of those things are things that are going to have bad results.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the next book when it comes out. When can we? Well, so this one, Why Socialism Struggles. This one's ready. You could order it. You could buy it. You can have it on your desktop within a day if you order on Amazon. The next one, I think, is ongoing. You're in the middle of writing it now, right? So
Yeah, it's about half done.
okay. Well, I think we should definitely do this again. I'm gonna let you go after one more thing actually, which is I gotta hear some about your band. So you do 50s to 7. I think you play with your wife. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is it?
Yeah,
It's a duo. Is it just the two of you?
yeah. We both play several instruments, so we record drums, bass,
Hmm.
backing vocals ahead of time, and then we play along live on top of that.
That's really cool.
But yeah, we do mostly 50s, 60s, early 70s rock and roll.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of I believe I found one song that was posted, but I did notice that you had some of the folks that I really like. I saw, let's see, Chuck Berry, the Beatles. Do you do a Sweet Home Alabama cover? Is that right?
Yeah,
Do you play the solo on that?
yeah, we do. Yeah.
That is, it's one of my favorite solos. It's one of my favorite solos. Every time it pops on and I hear it, it takes me to a certain place. It's just so incredibly done. Well, Doug, it's been a pleasure. I hope we do this again. I think especially with when your next book comes out, but if we want to do it earlier to catch up on some things that we didn't touch on, we never touched into nuclear energy, which was one of the things that I know we both have opinions on that are for the better of the common good. But we'll end it on that. Thanks again for hopping on.
Oh, it's been terrific. I'd be happy to do it again anytime you'd like.
Great. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. Just hang out for a second more.
You bet.